Okay, I'm gonna try. There was an old man called Greg who tried to break open an egg. He kicked it around but fell on the ground and found that he'd broken a leg. Hi everyone and welcome to Diana and the Written Words. I talk about books and about language and sometimes about both, and that's the case today. So this month I reread Matilda after I think it's been about 20 years. And on the first go, when I was little, I only read it in Spanish, whereas this time I listened to the audiobook in original English. Also, the audiobook was narrated by Kate Winslet, and I think she does a fantastic job with it. I could really tell she's an actress because she would intonate differently and have a different accent even, and change her voice for every single character. So it feels like it's a full cast audiobook. I would highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. I really enjoyed the reread as well because of the text itself. I feel like as a kid I had a very different experience with, I didn't realize how dark it is sometimes and how unfair and heartbreaking the attitude of adults towards Matilda is throughout the book. So this time I was being older and I could have a 5-year-old kid, and I feel like my heart breaks whenever Matilda is there being a perfect little girl. There's a genius on top of it and adults are just ignoring her or plain fighting her. So today in this video I just wanted to focus on one bit of language, and full disclaimer here, I don't mean to criticize the translators. I'm gonna criticize the translations though, but I do it in a light-hearted way. I just wanted to have fun with the text and engage with it in a different way. So this is not going to be a full review of the book. It's just focusing on the limericks and what Matilda has to do with it and how the translations dealt with the limerick that Matilda invents about Miss Honey. So there's this scene in Matilda that is one of my favorites, is when Miss Honey realizes that Matilda is a genius. I believe it's on the first day of class, and she's trying to see the extent of Matilda's skills. So one of the things she does is to take a book and have Matilda read it. And they mention that it's a limerick, which is a funny poem that is often very easy to understand and even satirical sometimes, but that is very difficult to make. And then Matilda is like, oh yeah, I know what you mean. I've been trying to make one about you and I've been having trouble with it. I found it difficult. And so Miss Honey is like, oh, please, Matilda, tell the class this limerick that you've invented about me. So they're talking about limericks, and then Matilda, with a lot of embarrassment, stands up to the class and recites the following limerick that she's just made up about Miss Honey. She goes, "The thing we all ask about Jenny is surely there cannot be many. Young girls in the place with so lovely a face, the answer to that is not any." And this is a lovely limerick. It's not satirical, it's not particularly funny, but it's just really sweet because of the theme that it explores. Let's put aside for now the fact that I don't think a 5-year-old girl would be thinking about how lovely her teacher's face is, and I think that might be the author talking there. But the limerick itself is really well constructed, I thought, and these play on words that it uses with many and any, I think it's really, really clever. And so I wanted to look at limericks, and specifically I thought, this must be really difficult to translate. I wonder how translators have dealt with this. So this is what I'm trying to explore in this video. Let's first talk about limericks. I've already kind of mentioned what they're about, but there are 3 rules to limericks that I found when I was researching for this video, because I'm no expert in limericks. But the first one is the number of syllables. So a limerick would always have 5 verses, And the first, second, and fifth verse have a lot in common, and then the third and fourth verses have a lot in common as well. With regards of the number of syllables, the first, second, and fifth verse have between 7 and 10 syllables. So in Matilda's limerick, we have the thing we all ask about Jenny, so that would be 9 syllables, is surely there cannot be many, also 9 syllables, which is even better because I feel like the text flows better if it is the exact same number of syllables. And then the last one is the answer to that is not any. So again, 9 syllables. And then we have these many and any that have a perfect rhyme, right? On top of the play on words that they offer. And then the third and fourth verses have between 5 and 7 syllables. So we have young girls in the place with so lovely a face. We have 5 syllables and then 6. I know that the number of syllables can change a little bit when you recite a poem because we can always kind of stretch syllables or put them together. So like I could say, the thing we all ask about Jenny, and kind of make Jenny just 1 syllable depending on how I recite it, right? So I'm just giving one of the examples. The second rule for limericks is the rhyming pattern. And that's again very clear in Matilda's limerick. We have Jenny, many, and any. So the first, second, and last verse rhyme together, and then the second and third verses also rhyme together. We have face and place. And the third rule, which in my view, I don't know if, well, in my view, I feel like it's the most important one because it's the one that gives you the overall flow, and that's the verbal rhythm, or the stress pattern as I like to call it in my head. And that is where the stresses are within a verse, so like the intonation when you're talking, rather than the stresses within every word. And we have that the first, second, and last verses have 3 stresses. So we have the thing we all ask about Jenny is surely there cannot be many, right? And then the third and fourth verses have 2 stresses. We have young girls in the place with so lovely a face, right? And that makes a limerick flow really well. I love how they sound. It's almost like you're singing. And that's what I believe a good poem should be. It should have a flow, even if there's no rhyming, even if, I don't know, if it gets so poetic you barely understand what is happening. It's not the case with limericks. Usually limericks are very direct, very easy to understand. But yeah, I love the way that limericks sound. It's always this right? So as I was saying, I had a look at translations, and I have to say I was disappointed because I was thinking this would be so cool if they could have translated it and kept, you know, the meaning of the words, the tone of the words, the rhyming pattern, the stress pattern, the number of syllables. How do you even attempt that, right? But what I actually did is that I didn't just want to criticize for the sake of it. I wanted to then attempt to do my own, and that is what I'm going to do in this video. Feel free to criticize it. Feel free to offer alternative translations in the comments. One thing I did want to say is that I'm going to be talking about the translations in Catalan and Spanish, but that you don't really need to know the languages in order to kind of get what I'm saying, because this is all about text flow and about intonation. So even if you don't understand the words, know that the words are basically the translation of the words in English. So I first looked at the Spanish translation by Pedro Barbadillo, and it goes like this. Lo que de Jenny todos tenemos en mente es si probablemente hay en esta escuela bendita chicas de cara tan bonita. La respuesta a esto es ninguna. I have tried to recite it in a way that also shows the melody to it, but there isn't much to work with. So let's have a look. One thing that Pedro Barbadillo does that it was actually quite clever is that in the text, in the original English, Matilda and Miss Honey do mention that this is a limerick. And so then when it comes with a limerick, we know what to expect if we know what it is. But in the Spanish translation, he decided to call it a quintilla. And it was like, yeah, that is a good idea because then you can do whatever you want, right? So I looked at what a quintilla is. It always has 5 verses. This is where the name comes from, like quint. Like for example, in English you have quintessential. This is where quint comes from, is 5. So the 5th essence for quintessential. And in quintilla it means that it's got 5 verses. But then I went to my very academic source of information, which was Wikipedia, and it told me that a quintilla has 5 verses of 8 syllables, and that it's got a few rhyming patterns that you can use, but they are also fixed. Like you can't have 3 verses rhyming in the same way, for example. Now, it might be that quintilla also means a general poem, any poem with 5 verses, but this is not what I found. So an example of this is from the Cancionero General number 481. It is the example that Wikipedia is giving us, and it reads: Cualquier pasión y dolor que se sufra es justa cosa, pues se sufre por amor de la mayor y mejor del mundo y la más hermosa. Let's go back to the Spanish translation. The first verse is lo que de Jenny todos tenemos en mente. So how many syllables do we have here? Lo que de Jenny todos tenemos en mente. I have 13 syllables. It's not 8 like in a quintilla. It's not 7 to 10 like in a limerick. There's a few syllables that I could be merging together there, but you know, every verse seems to have a different syllable count. So with the Spanish translation, we've got that it doesn't comply with the number of syllables or the rhyming pattern or the stress pattern, and it doesn't comply with those for a quintilla either. But I think it was a clever thing to not talk about limerick, to kind of get away of that very strict structure for a limerick. I then looked into the Catalan translation, and that was done by Ramon Barnils, and it reads like this. El que ens preguntem sobre Jenny és segurament no hi pot haver gaires noies en aquest indret amb una cara tan agradable. La resposta és no cap. Again, we get that it doesn't fit any of the rules, and in this case, the text does talk about limerick specifically. So what gives? So I was telling my partner about this, and he was like, well, you can't criticize something without doing it yourself. And therefore I attempted my own limericks. As I said, just give me your versions if you want, or try to make one in your native language if it's something other than Spanish or Catalan. And it would be fun to see, you know, what people come up with. Bear in mind, in both translations that I've read from Pedro Barbadillo and from Ramon Barnils, they do keep the meaning. In the Spanish one, it says en esta escuela bendita, which is more like in this holy school, whereas in the English version, it only says in this place. No, in the place, actually. Yeah, young girls in the place. So it's not specifying it, but that's not a big change of meaning because we understand that it's probably talking about the school anyway. And in the Catalan translation, again, I think the meaning is pretty accurate. It's just when it comes to the actual making it a poem that it fails, in my opinion. So I just did this for fun. I'm no professional, I'm no linguist, and so bear in mind that. For the Spanish translation, here is my limerick. De Jenny tengo una pregunta. Seguro no puede haber muchas chicas por aquí bonitas así. Respondo a ello ni una. So what I tried to do with this is to actually follow the rules of the limerick. And let's look at it. So number of syllables. De Jenny tengo una pregunta. 9. Yeah, between 7 and 10. Seguro no puede haber muchas. 9 again. So again is a bit nicer if we do 9 and 9. Chicas por aquí, bonitas así. Respondo a ello ni una. So we have 5, 5 and 9 again. Good. Rhyming pattern. We want to see A, A, B, B, A. And I'm rhyming pregunta with muchas and una. This is what we call in Spanish an assonant rhyme, assonant, where only the vowels rhyme and not the consonants. And it's a valid one, although it's a lesser one than if actually all letters of the last syllable at least rhymed. So we have unta, pregunta, UA, muchas, UA again, and una, UA again. And then the last one is this verbal rhythm or stress pattern, as I call it. I'm sure it's not called like that. Which I tried to do again. So, de Jenny tengo una pregunta. Seguro no puede haber muchas. Chicas por aquí, bonitas así. Respondo a ello ni una. And this was particularly difficult because in English it's very easy to find words that have just one syllable, and that the limericks use a lot of that. Like if we think of there was an old man called Greg, every single word in that line, in that verse, has one syllable. Whereas in Spanish it's not the case. And also in the English version of this limerick, we have the first verse ending in Jenny, but it's not that easy to find words that finish in ni in Spanish. So I had to kind of move the sentence around, which makes sense, and it's something that is done in poetry, but the text is a little bit weird. It's not something that we would say in everyday language. So, de Jenny tengo una pregunta. The whole thing makes sense and it's grammatically correct, so you know, I'm giving myself a pass on that. And then for Catalan, it is a little bit weirder, and I broke some grammatical rules as well, but it's still understandable. It's still a okay translation, I think, of the original English, and it follows the limerick rules. So this is what I came up with. It's very similar, by the way, is very similar to the Spanish translation. I've basically used the same words in the same way, but just in Catalan in this case. And it goes, de Jenny tinc una pregunta. Segur no n'hi deu haver moltes. De noies d'aquí, boniques així, responga a això que ni una. For this one, the rhyme is a little bit weaker. So we have pregunta and moltes, which is not really a rhyme, not even an assonant one, because I have u and which are the sounds in my first verse. But in the second one, we have o and and then in the last one, I go back to u and The verses 3 and 4 do rhyme, aquí and així, and it's again one of those assonant rhymes, which is just rhyming the vowels. So we have A and E again. And that is all I have about limericks and Matilda and my focus about this reread. There's of course lots of other things to say about Matilda, and I believe Emily Cait is preparing a video on that. So I'll leave her channel below because she does talk about Roald Dahl, and she had the Day of Dahl a while ago where she read a bunch of Roald Dahl books. So if you're interested in Roald Dahl as an author, then you might want to have a look at her channel, because also it's a fantastic channel. It's one of my favorite booktubers. So I'll leave it down below, and we can both monitor Emily Cait to see if she posts something about Matilda. On my side, I suppose I would have other things to say, but I wanted to keep this video short and sweet. One of the things that I found shocking upon reading it as an adult was the quick coding of Miss Trunchbull, and something that she says at some point, which is something like, I've never been a girl. I grew up very quickly. And I was like, what do you mean? You've never been a girl? I mean, maybe she identifies as a man, and Roald Dahl didn't tell us other than with that sentence. That would be an interesting read of Matilda. But the way she's described and everything, it does seem like queer coding to me. But anyway, as I said, I don't want to keep this video too long. I was just really interested in how we translate poetry. And I have to say, I was expecting a bit more, but hopefully I came up myself with something that satisfies me personally. I think it does satisfy me what I came up with, and I had a lot of fun trialing it on. So let me know in the comments what you thought. What are your thoughts on translating poetry, or when a translation requires more than just going through the text and kind of keeping the tone and the meaning into consideration? And if you have any thoughts about the limericks. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.